So like I knew all these banks, I knew these fund of funds, I knew all the players in that market because they were my clients. So I was swimming in those markets, in those worlds. I was just in the legal side, not the investment side. So the crossover really wasn't that hard.
You just switched sides of the table.
I just switched sides of the table.
So you just switched sides of the table, and all those people that you were doing business with, they gave you the money.
They gave us the money, and then a lot of the deals that we did were people that I knew, that I had relationships with.
And you knew the deals.
Knew the deals.
So today we talked to a guy named Scott Olson. Now Scott, in his bio and knowing him, it's really fascinating. So his mom was 16 years old when he was born, and his parents were in an abusive relationship. But then he comes out of being in a small town in Alabama. Not many people know where Vinemont, Alabama is, but I do because my mom's right from up in the area.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. But from finishing college in 2 years, and then going to Vanderbilt Law School, and then hedge fund, and then all these different companies. And so, man, I've known Scott for a while, but I haven't really dug into Scott for a long, long time. So, Scott, thanks for joining me today.
Man, thanks for having me. This is so much fun.
So, we were sitting out in the lobby talking before we came in here, and we had a bunch of different things. And so, I'm reading and learning about you, and I go, there's a gap here. Like, there's something here that I'm not seeing. But tell me about growing up with a teenage mom. What you remember of that.
Yeah, I remember a lot of it, actually. Some of it I'd like to forget,
sure,
to be honest with you. But my mom's always been the greatest. I used to do a lot of mentoring in the inner city in Dallas, in a little rough neighborhood called Bontyne, and everybody would always ask me, like, what's the ingredient, like, to get out of there?
Yeah.
Like, what does somebody take? And there's probably a lot of things, but I always said, you really just need one parent. Like, everybody talks about a two-parent home, which I think is great.
Sure.
But you just need one of them that's really willing to do anything for you. And that was really my mom. I mean, she, from the day I was born, she was there to protect me and work 3 jobs and encourage me. And she always thought there was something more for me. And, so she was always there for me. But we had it rough. I mean, we had a tough time. I mean, she had a marriage that was difficult that she finally escaped from. And, then she tried to raise me and live life, and she was just a kid herself.
Sure.
So my grandparents played a big role.
I was going to ask, who else was there to help?
Yeah, it was my grandparents. My mom would, take me over there at 5 a.m., and a lot of times I was staying there. She was trying to work 3 shifts. She was sewing at the time and ended up getting her GED because she dropped out of high school and then went back to college and got a master's degree and then became a CRNA.
No.
Yeah, she actually built a company and sold it, and she's heroic, really.
Sure.
And then at the same time, she was trying to find her life and create her life and build her life. But she was always there for me, always kind of putting me in front of everything else in life.
So I'm gonna kind of get the story out of whack here. So you go to the Air Force, okay, and then you go from Air Force to UAB.
Yeah.
You get an accounting degree in 2 years.
Yeah.
Then go to Vanderbilt for law school. Mm-hmm. Now, I know people that went to Vanderbilt. They're usually extremely rich or extremely intelligent. And I sit here and I go, the first question I ask myself is his intelligence just off the charts? And so, like, were you ever diagnosed as like, super intelligent guy? So what's going on up there?
Yeah. It's funny. I always tell people, like, I really don't know that much, and I'm really not that smart. And it kind of depends on how you define or judge intelligence.
Sure.
So, like, for me, like, I was a good athlete. It's kind of hard to probably believe now, but I was a really great athlete in a small school because Vinemont. We talked about it.
Small 1A or 2A, yeah.
Right? I mean, like, we played these schools that had people that played offense and defense. We played everything, right? You were returning punts.
Exactly.
You were on.
And you saw them 2 months later playing basketball.
Exactly.
It's the same
so
kids.
You did everything. So I was a really good athlete, but I was also, I think, smart enough and just street smarts, if you will, to kind of get by. So I kind of went through school without learning a whole lot. I made it through law school without actually ever reading a book. I mean, I think that's like a miracle record. So when you ask me about knowledge, like, I don't know things. Like, I don't know history. I don't have a lot of knowledge in terms of things and events. But I've always been really, really, really good at figuring things out. which the reason that translates into how do you get into Vanderbilt Law School is because I've always been a good test taker because I know how to figure out the test. So I did really well on the LSAT.
Did you study for the LSAT?
I studied the test. See, the thing about an LSAT is it's not a knowledge test, it's a testing test. Like there's not knowledge, you can't learn the material.
You can't study it.
Exactly. It's all about how do you think. Well, I'm a really good thinker. Like I would have done really poorly if it would have been a history test. I would have probably failed, to be honest with you. But it was a thinking test. And to a large degree, college, because I have an accounting degree, was somewhat the same thing. Like numbers have always made sense because they're kind of like a puzzle. They're not a knowledge thing.
Why accounting?
I think accounting because I didn't really have a plan in life, to be honest with you.
Okay.
After the military and the Air Force and I went back to school, it's just to me that felt like the best opportunity to get a job in the future. I really wasn't thinking about something I liked necessarily. I was very much about how do I actually do something that makes money in the future.
How did you do college in 2 years?
Well, that's the whole reason I chose UAB, to be honest with you, because UAB, most people don't know this, but it does semester hours on a quarter system.
It did back then.
It did back then.
Because my first 2 years, we were on quarters.
There you go. So they did semester hours on a quarter system, and they run mini terms and summer
They
terms.
did.
So I could get a
Maymesters.
Exactly. And I did every one of those, and I got a exemption from the dean to take 15 hours every quarter. So I was getting 15 semester hours per quarter and doing mini terms and summer terms. So that's how I was able to do it.
That makes sense. All right, so my next question is, as a kid with a single mom at the time, how did you afford Vandy?
We did loans and
just loans.
Yeah, I mean, we just took out loans and paid them back. I mean, we didn't have, I didn't get a scholarship. I wasn't, I wasn't that good. So we just did loans and just worked our way out of it. To be honest with you, the hard way.
So, talking to you and reading up about you, there was this, and it stuck out to me. And here's the difference in you and I is I'm a reader. Like I like to read, and I like to process and things and all those different things. So, you get out of Vandy, and you found a law firm straight out of law school. How does that happen?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an intersection. So really right out of law school, I actually went to work for a big firm called Andrews & Kurt. That was my first job. And I went to work for a guy named David Barber, who's still a dear friend of mine. And I had this special, unique practice in Dallas working with Wall Street banks in an area of the world called securitization. And
okay, I saw that term. I don't know what that is.
So securitization would be like, if you remember like all the mortgage-backed securities, remember The Big Short?
Big Short,
movies?
yeah.
So I lived that. Like I knew The Big Short guys. I was in the middle of all of that. So like pre that, I was the attorney that was helping them securitize mortgages and CDOs and CLOs and all those types of things.
Okay.
So all that was being done out of the practice that I joined, and it's kind of interesting. I hated being there and having people know more than me. So I just worked myself to death to become a subject matter expert in about a year and a half. And into that, about a year and a half into this, through this process, there was a couple of clients that came in, a guy that worked for CSFB, which was DLJ, and then a guy that was starting a refinery business. Those two guys, one of them's a guy named Paul Foster, and the other guy, his name was Bruce, and they became clients of mine, and they were small nothing at the time.
When you say clients of yours, you're at the law firm, and they're just using your firm as legal counsel.
Exactly. And I happened to be the one that got handed the file and got to start working with them. Okay. So,
when you say start working with them as a lawyer in this practice, what does that mean? Just reviewing contracts?
Yeah, like the one for Bruce was I was giving him a legal opinion for some of the stuff they were doing. It was a company out of Austin. And for Paul, he was trying to buy a refinery. So I started working on that M&A transaction for him.
Okay. So you said you spent a year and a half. You said, I hate having someone in the room that knows more than I do. Yeah. And so I spent a year and a half working hard. What did you do in that year and a half?
So back then you didn't have online stuff.
No, you
had
didn't.
Libraries. So in those libraries, they had all these deals that they had closed in the past. I would go in there and read all those deals and make 100 questions. And there was a partner, his name was Pat Sargent. I would go to Pat every day and say, Pat, I got 100 questions. Can you answer them for me? And I would do that every night.
And he would do it.
He would do it. He took the time to teach me. And
how valuable was that guy?
Oh my gosh, it was so valuable. I mean, to this day. In fact, Pat Sargent was really the first person to start talking to me about Jesus too. So he plays a double role in my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great man.
So one of the things that said global co-head of structured finance and derivatives. Yeah. What the heck is that?
Well, structured finance is just a big fancy word for all the securitization
Sure.
and big off-balance sheet transactions for banks and things like that.
So, and derivatives is just a term for the stock market, like buying and selling different tools in the stock market. Is that right?
It's options and swaps and ISDA agreements and things like that. So like if you remember back, and when AIG got bailed out, they were talking about, they had all these swaps and insurance contracts that they had in place. Well, that really falls under derivatives. It's a lot of hedging strategies.
So I got a question about that in just a second. So in a big law firm, okay, how did you make money? Was it hourly, or did you get court proceeds? Like, how did you make money in this first law firm?
Yeah, you were just on a salary with a bonus, So my first job, I think right out of law school, my first salary was $43,500 a year.
Wow.
And it increased pretty rapidly. And I got those two clients, and it's actually those two clients are clients that I took and started my own firm after about a year and a half.
Your own law firm.
And it was a firm called Larson King that was in existence in Minneapolis, but it was a litigation-only firm. So I started their entire corporate practice, and myself and a couple of lawyers, and I built that up to about 30 lawyers, and then moved it over to another bigger firm called Greenberg.
Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay, so you're 2 years out of law school.
Yep.
And you decide, did you get pissed off at the people that you were with, or did you just say, hey, I can do this a better way?
Yeah, I've always been a builder, and I've always been someone that loves to create and grow. I don't think I'm a very good manager. We'll probably talk about that later, but I'm a good builder. And I just felt like I could do it. I felt like there was a guy that was at that firm named Lowry Barfield, who is still to this day a great friend of mine. And Lowry encouraged me to do it, and it just turned out to be great. Those two clients, like Paul Foster, became Forbes billionaire and bought a ton of refineries, and he's still one of my dearest friends today.
Yeah.
He was with me. I was with him on the day my oldest son was born, so he's kind of the de facto godfather.
Yeah, sure.
Paul, but yeah, and then the relationship with CSFB DLJ. I turned that into really one of the larger securitization structured finance practices on Wall Street. I kept an office in New York for all those years.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of hard work and a lot of, you got to be a people person to do that, right? Because I always tell people, like, you want to talk about the hardest thing in the world to sell is legal services. Nobody likes lawyers.
No.
Nobody wants to pay
Not until
lawyers.
they absolutely need one.
Exactly. So you're trying to sell a service that really is hard to differentiate, right? Because every big firm has good lawyers.
Sure.
So you really have to be someone they want to do business with and they really like. And so you got to have that whole package of we're going to be friends and you're going to enjoy being with me, and I'm also going to do the best work in the world.
How important is track record in that business?
Yeah, I think it is important because
you didn't have a track record.
I had no track record.
You're 25 years old.
Well,
you don't have a track record.
I wasn't very old. I was a little bit older because of the Air Force.
The Air Force,
but, I had no track record. I outworked everybody. I worked harder than anybody else in the business, and I was smart enough to put things together. And if you think about that world of finance, high finance, and structured securitizations, it's all about that puzzle, right?
It is.
Which is what my mind is really good at. So I was always really, really good at my job, and I outworked everybody. And I also was somebody that people enjoyed being around.
So in 2006, you're going through this whole process. You're a lawyer. You start this firm. Let's talk about, because in 2006 you start a hedge fund.
Yep.
But there's a time there where you're a lawyer and you're starting these different, I don't want to say law firms, but you're starting these different divisions of these other law firms.
Yep.
So you're not actually starting a firm, but you've got firm A over here, and then I'm going to start this division of that firm. So in essence, you're a partner. Partners means you're quasi-owner, at least of that section.
That's right.
So during this time, how are you making money?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The first law firm, the Larson King one, was really just me building my practice and growing. I was a partner, so I got a distribution of profits in that firm. My real big break, though, that really kind of set me to a different level was a guy named Richard Rosenbaum, wonderful human being. He was one of the leaders of a firm called Greenberg Traurig. At the time, Greenberg was the second largest law firm in the world. And I got a call one day from Richard saying, hey, we'd like for you to open up our Dallas market. They had no presence in Texas. They wanted me to open Dallas and Houston and other markets in Texas.
What kind of law firm was it?
They're everything. Even today, Greenberg's probably 2,000 plus lawyers. They do every type of law.
So you open. So that was your. How was that your big break?
I had about 30 lawyers at the time, and we moved all 30 of those and became the Dallas office of Greenberg Traurig, which now there's a Houston office, Austin office. It's a great Texas firm, still one of the biggest firms in the world. You can go to anybody in the world and ask them about Greenberg Traurig, and they're going to know it. So I have instantaneous credibility when I tell them I was a global head of structured finance for Greenberg Traurig. It's a huge firm, and I got the opportunity. So I've only been out of law school at this point in time about 3 or 4 years. I'm the co-global head of structured finance for the second largest law firm in the world, and I was serving on their executive committee. And we could talk a lot about that, Thomas, because there was a guy on that committee with me. His name was Jack Abramoff. I don't know if you've ever heard that name, Jack Abramoff, but Jack, they refer to him. They did a movie about Jack called Casino Jack, because he was
wow.
He actually went to prison, but he was doing deals with the Indian tribe nations. You can look it up.
Yeah.
He wrote a book. You should read the book. Jack was on that committee with me, so I got to be at the table in the big leagues at a really young age.
I was going to say, you're 26, 27, 28 years old.
Just a young kid. And in fact, some would say that I was probably the youngest partner in a top 5 law firm ever, maybe. I don't know if there's anybody ever been younger than me. Because most of the time you'd have to be out of school 10, 12 years probably to make a lawyer in one of those firms. I was a lawyer at a young age.
So so people who are lawyers, 90% of the time people think of lawyers as the guy in the courtroom doing. You're not doing law, you're doing deals.
Yeah, I was in the boardrooms with the finance groups at, JP Morgan and Bank of America and, Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank. And I mean, we're putting transactions together to finance their balance sheet and to finance mortgages and auto loans and credit cards and pipelines in Turkey and those types of things.
What you talk about your big break. Your big break was when you started the Dallas market. What did that do to you financially?
Well, financially, it did, a lot. I was making more money than I could ever dream in my whole life because I was a partner at a top 5 law firm in the world. And the other thing it did to me is it just put me at the table with a different league of people. Now I was able to sit with CEOs of banks. Yeah. So my network grew. So, you can appreciate, right? If you're leading that division,
no doubt.
We had 37 offices. I was hiring lawyers in,
all over
Switzerland,
the
and London, and Amsterdam, and Silicon Valley, and Chicago, and DC. So I built this really big network that even still today I utilize.
So let's talk about that. So hiring, anything that you did from a hiring perspective that you felt like was a cheat code or anything?
Yeah, it was a lot easier, I would say, in some respects, because everybody you're hiring in that world is kind of a type A, overachiever that's been at a top 10 law firm that, has a massive goals in life that really are, trying to get ahead. So it was kind of just really picking amongst a bunch of stars, a bunch of kind of top talent. Think about the University of Alabama and recruiting.
Back when I was coaching in college, I went to visit Mac Brown, who's at Texas.
Yeah,
back when they were at the top, Vince Young, all those guys.
Yeah.
And I looked at him one day, and I was sitting in his office. I looked at him one day. I said, how do you recruit all the best players in the country? And he looks at me, and this was you have to picture this as a non-arrogant man in a non-arrogant statement. He goes, Thomas, he called me Tommy. He's the only guy in the world that calls me that. He goes, Tommy, this is University of Texas. We don't recruit, we pick.
There you go.
And at that point, I was like, I get it.
Yep.
When you're at that size, at that place, you can pick who you want.
That's right. We were selective in going to certain law schools.
Sure.
We would recruit them to be, come work for us. Now, it was a little more difficult when you were hiring seasoned lawyers, trying to bring over books of business and stuff. But even that's like, everybody's good, right?
Can you offer at this type of place, can you offer them more money because you've got more? And does that like seal the deal? A, this prestigious law firm, and B, we can pay you more money.
Yeah, that, and we'll also help your business, right? We'll drive more relationships for you. We'll drive more synergies with you. You'll get draft off of what we do as a firm, so that'll make you bigger. You'll be able to sell more services to your clients.
Right. Okay, so you're doing this in the law firm business and all that. Okay. Were you introduced to Jesus? What year?
After this, 2008.
2008. Okay, so we'll get to that. Okay. So I'm trying to get my timelines. So what made you want to leave law and start a hedge fund?
Yeah, so To this day, I can't say enough good things about Cesar Alvarez and Richard Rosenbaum. Cesar was the CEO of Greenberg Traurig, and what a great man. He was a Cuban American that came over in a boat from Cuba and became CEO of one of the largest firms in the world. And he was so kind to me and just loved me and mentored me. And I think that I had an opportunity to really lead that firm potentially over time. I mean, you don't know what would have happened.
Sure.
But I remember one time I was flying back from a meeting in Miami to Dallas, and on that plane, I was just thinking to myself, man, do I really want to manage lawyers the rest of my life? It was a hard business. It's much harder than people think, especially in big New York practice. It's fast moving. I was never at home. Lawyers are hard to manage. And I just thought, no, I don't really want to do this. And it just so happened maybe a month after that, I got an opportunity to start this hedge fund with some guys that wanted to raise capital and some banks that wanted to come in and partner with us. And I was a risk taker, so I wanted to take the risk.
So you're in the law firm. You're married. Any kids yet? This is
point in
2004, 2005.
2004, we had Spencer was a couple years old, and I think Grace was born in 2005, so Aaron was probably. We had a baby. We had a baby Grace, and then Spencer.
Were you working just massive amounts of hours?
Oh. I mean, I was never home. I mean, I spent 2 weeks a month in New York, and the other 2 weeks I spent all over the world. I mean, I'd come home and change clothes, and Erin was a single mom for all those years.
Did she ever travel with you?
She never traveled with me. She was just trying to raise kids, back then, people in school and have babies.
Was that hard on your marriage?
Oh my gosh, really hard. I mean, I don't even think we had much of a relationship during those years, to be honest with you. I think she was just so caught up in raising kids and trying to be a mom and raise human beings, because we didn't really have family around us. So
in Dallas,
she was all by herself, and so she had her hands full, raising kids, and me, I just was so focused on growing my business and building something. I just had this insatiable appetite to try to achieve something in life.
So at the time, neither one of you had a relationship with Jesus.
No.
What do you think that not having that faith was more of a strain?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a trick question because, I mentor a lot of young guys I have a lot of young guys that are young lawyers that'll want to come get my advice because they know my career.
Sure.
And one of the questions they always ask me is like, what would you do different? Or, and I always have to layer in my faith, but then I'm quick to point out that if I'd have been a believer, I don't think I would have been as successful as I was. I just don't think the two could go together. I know everybody says that you can do it, but that's a hard, ugly world, and it's not a faith-filled world. It's a hard charging world. It's a heavy drinking world. It's a be away from your house world. It's tough. I think it would be really, really, really hard to do that. I mean, nothing's impossible with God,
sure.
Right? But so I can't go back in my mind and relive the success I had as a believer, because I'm not sure it would have been possible. In fact, here's a cool story. One of the guys that was, critical to my faith was a guy named Mike Fetchner, and in the early days when I was trying to live out my life as a believer after some of the stuff that we'll get to, I remember I used to tell Mike all the time, I'm like, Mike, I don't know how to live my life as a Christian. Like, I don't know how to live the way I lived with what I now have inside of me and the moral compass that I now that I live by. I was like a fish out of water. It actually took me years to figure out how to be comfortable in who I was as a Christian.
During this time, you were raised by a really great lady.
Yeah.
During the time when you were working so hard and working so long, where was your moral compass? Were you doing horrible things, or were you like, I'm just trying to do the right moral thing because I think it's the right thing, because you didn't have Jesus?
No.
So tell me about, like, where was that moral compass in those years?
So, I mean, listen, first of all, I wouldn't sit here and say that I did everything right.
Sure.
And there are certainly things I'm not proud of to this day, probably that I would love to have done differently.
Yeah.
My moral compass came from, this is a kind of a crazy story, but so when I was a kid growing up, obviously I didn't have faith in my life. We really weren't in church,
Right.
and I didn't have the constant father figure. And I used to watch a television show called Spencer for Hire. Do you remember that show?
I do.
Robert Urich. Mm-hmm. I loved Spencer for Hire. So I always tell people I learned all of my morals from Spencer for Hire. Wow. If you go back and watch that show, and I've watched every one of them 1,000 times, I mean, he just stood for. He had a code. Spencer had a code. Kept his word. Lived by his word. Showed up for friends.
Didn't mention Jesus at all.
Never.
Just did just the whole golden rule.
Good guy. Just a guy you could count on. He was the guy that was there no matter what. And he's the guy that picked you up on the side of the road at 2:00 in the morning.
Sure.
He was the guy that did the right thing always, that was honest and integrity. Didn't have Jesus anywhere in his life. And I like that show so much that my son Spencer is named after Spencer for Hire. That's why he spells it with an S.
I saw that. I was like, I misspelled his name.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, so I named him after Spencer for Hire. So, of course, he was born before I was a believer.
Wow.
So Christ wasn't in there. So,
man, oh, man.
So I always had this... I always lived by kind of this code of like your handshake is like oak, and so that was always.
I think that being in the South, I mean, I knew where you grew up. Like being in the South of like, you may not have been in church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, but like you were probably around decent people.
100%.
And then also a really good TV show. That sounds silly,
right.
But it's the truth. A really good TV show that kind of directed your path.
For sure. Still to this day, and I mean, okay, I'm going to go off on.
You're good. You're good.
I'll try not to, but so as you know, my wife's dealing with cancer
Yes,
right
sir.
now, breast cancer, and when she first was diagnosed, I was trying to do something really nice for her. So my son, as you know, he's a singer and records music, and a dear friend of ours is a guy named Phil Vassar, who's a country music songwriter and singer.
Yeah.
So I called Phil and I said, Phil, I want you to record a song, Firm Foundation, Cody Carnes' song, Firm Foundation. I want you to do it with Spencer. So we went up to Nashville and recorded that song. It's a great, I'll send it to you. But we did it in this producer studio, and the producer that we did it for, he did all the music for Spencer for Hire. So I'm in his studio. He's got a picture of Robert Urich on the wall.
And you're looking at it going, that's my guy.
That's my guy. So it's so interesting that still today, like,
that's incredible.
I'm still thinking about things I learned from a television show in the 80s.
But you know what, though? I mean, it's not faith-based, but there's still always a place. I mean, it's always a place to do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
Just do the right thing.
Yeah.
But my dad was an alcoholic for years and years and years. And one of the things he used to say, they used to teach him in AA, was do the next right thing.
Do the next. I love that.
Just do the next right thing. So in 2006, you left your law firm, started a hedge fund.
Yeah.
In 45 seconds, explain, what is a hedge fund?
Hedge fund is really just pooling investment dollars from institutions and individuals to collectively invest it in some type of investment strategy. It could be the stock market, it could be assets, it could be a whole bunch of different investments. But it's really just the pooling of other banks, institutional investors, and individuals' capital to go do something together.
What's the difference in a hedge fund manager and a financial planner?
So a financial planner is generally just helping you plan around what you have. A hedge fund manager is saying, hey, give me a little bit of that. I'll put it with these other 100 individuals and institutions, and we'll, as a group, invest it together.
So more would create more.
We'll create more because if I put it together, then we've got bigger deals we can do. We can get into different transactions. I can add a layer of professional management on top of it.
Sure. Okay. So I learned about hedge funds. I called my financial advisor, and this was probably a year or two ago, and I hate to say this. I said, what's a hedge fund? And he started explaining it to me. And
was he better than me at explaining it?
no, y'all explained it really, really different. He explained the nuts and the bolts of
Got it. Okay.
Like the percentages and things like
that.
that.
Oh, he's getting into the technical.
The details of it.
Yeah, which you need to know if you're going to invest.
So correct me if I'm wrong. A financial planner takes 1% of managed assets, typically 1.5%, maybe 2%. Mm-hmm. A hedge fund manager takes 2% of managed assets, but also takes 20% of the upside.
Profits,
So if the company makes profits, if we go from $100 million to $120 million, you take the $20 million that you, quote, made, and you take 20% of that.
That's right.
And you get 2% of the 120.
That's right.
There's a lot of wealth that can be created there.
I mean, listen, some of the richest people in the world are hedge fund managers.
Listen, so I got to looking the other day. So I get this newsletter by this guy, this CrossFit guy, and it's the most interesting newsletter because he just gives like 8 or 10 random facts. Yeah. And he sits there and he goes, hey, the Forbes 400 came out, and he just rattled off some fact. I clicked on it, and I started looking at it. Scott.
Oh yeah.
Other than like Elon and Warren
Yep.
and like a couple of these people,
Yeah.
bro, every fifth one and sometimes 4 in a row are hedge fund managers.
Oh, for sure. It's the power of dollars.
And no one knows
No.
these guys.
No. That's right.
No one knows them.
That's right.
Like they're just nameless and faceless. And if you Google one of them, you ain't finding nothing.
That's right.
And it got me thinking to myself, okay, so where are these dollars coming from?
Oh my gosh. So I would tell you that they come from all different baskets from, things like sovereign wealth funds.
What is that?
So a sovereign wealth fund is like the fund that invests on behalf of Saudi Arabia or on behalf of Qatar or, and there's also pension funds. Like every state has a pension fund. State of Alabama pension fund, state of California pension fund, state of Texas pension fund. In fact, Texas has a teacher's retirement fund. They have a fireman and police retirement fund. All of these are investing in funds.
And so like the teacher of Alabama Teachers Association. So they created the Robert Trent Jones Trail and used that as an investment. But like also they get X number of dollars a month from every teacher in the estate, and that goes into a big pool. But then that money has to go out to the people that are retired, i.e. my mom.
That's right.
That money has to go out to the people that retired, but then they take those dollars and they give a portion to some hedge funds?
Oh, for sure. They'll allocate it across 10 different hedge funds. I mean, like BlackRock.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about BlackRock.
Right?
Yeah. They're like 11 trillion in assets under management. Well, most of that comes from people like Alabama Retirement. I mean, most of it comes from state entities that just give them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars.
And if you get hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, and it moves 2 or 3%,
make a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, bro.
Make a lot of money.
Somebody said that some of these endowments, Harvard, Yale, Samford.
Oh, they are all putting it in those hedge
Baylor.
funds. Yeah.
Like say Samford's got bukus of money.
For sure. Harvard,
and that
Texas.
what they'll take is they'll take these endowments and they'll allocate X number of dollars across however many of these hedge funds.
That's right.
So hedge funds are, do you have to, when you were doing your hedge fund, did you say, all right, Thomas, give me $1 million, and then I'm going to take your $1 million, and I'm going to keep it for how long? Did you make me commit to a certain number of years?
Yeah, we didn't really take a lot of individual dollars, but I'll play out
play the
game. Usually, a hedge fund allows you to get certain amounts of liquidity, but not all of it. Because the reason is you don't want to liquidate at the wrong time, right? You don't want an individual to create a liquidation that impacts everybody in that fund, right? So what they do is they put up things called gates. And a gate basically says you can only do 10% every quarter or 10% every 2 quarters. So it just limits the run on the bank, if you will.
Because the run on the bank hurts the compounding.
It hurts everybody. That's
right.
Think you got 100 people in it, and one person wants out, and they cause the whole thing to have to liquidate because they've got a big position. You got to manage that. So,
but if I pull out 10%, does everybody have to pull out 10%?
No, but if there's more than one person that wants to come out, they'll have to balance it. So the 10% is the total. So you couldn't get, but your pro rata share of that 10%.
Give me the who you pulled money from and what you guys invested in when you guys started.
Yeah. We got money mainly from what back in that day was called fund of funds. And fund of funds were these big aggregators of capital from offshore banks mainly and from pension funds and from all the endowments. They kind of served as a gatekeeper. So they went out and collected all these dollars and said, hey, we're really good at picking fund managers. So give us the dollars and then we'll allocate it across the fund so that you don't have to do all the research and things like that. So most of our money came through those fund of funds scenarios.
You got the money from the fund of funds.
That's right. So they would go raise it from the Alabama teachers and Alabama retirement, all of that. They'd aggregate it, and then they'd say, we'll give some to this hedge fund, some to this hedge fund, some to this hedge fund.
And you got money from...
And we got money from a bunch of different ones of those.
What did you guys invest in when you did that?
Mainly, we were investing in pools of assets, like could be mortgages, credit card, auto loans, Harley-Davidson motorcycle loans, pools of real estate, multifamily apartments, and things like that. And usually it was in partnership with a bank or a private equity fund. So a private equity fund that would put in equity dollars and a bank that might have a senior loan, we would come in and provide what they would call stretch equity, and we would provide like a mezz loan.
Bro, you are. I know.
I knew this was going down a bad path.
I know more than most about this stuff, but I am swimming right now.
I knew this was
Sierra is like having to decipher what he's saying back there. So, here's the thing. The reason I keep asking these questions is because I love this and I enjoy learning about this, because there's a whole hidden world out there that like the bulk of society doesn't know. Not a bad world. No. It's just a world. It's honestly, Scott, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's how our country runs.
No question.
The finances and the give and the gains, this is how our country's run.
No question.
And without these guys that make just massive, obscene amounts of money, the state of Alabama and all these pension funds and all these endowments, they wouldn't have money because they honestly don't know what to do.
They have no idea. And they don't have really they can't build the team to have the expertise to go find the deals, structure the deals, invest in the deals.
So you got the hedge fund. You sold the hedge fund. How long did you do the hedge fund?
So we had the hedge fund from start to finish about 4.5 years.
Okay. Where did you get the money to start the hedge fund? Who did you raise the money from?
Well, we got all the capital through these fund of funds, right? And immediately you start making money because you're getting 2% on assets under management.
But how did they give you? How did they trust Scott Olson, who's the 30-year-old, former lawyer that doesn't have any hedge fund experience? Yeah. How are they giving it to you? Why are they giving it to you?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. One, I had a pretty big reputation at the time. I mean, I was running a very, very large legal practice doing this exact same thing.
But it's legal. But I don't. Okay, so you're running a legal practice. You're doing M&A and things like that. But
well, I was representing all these people. So like I knew all these banks. I knew these fund of funds. I knew all the players in that market because they were my clients. So I was swimming in those markets, in those worlds. I was just in the legal side, not the investment side. So the crossover really wasn't that hard.
You just switched sides of the table.
I just switched sides of the table.
So you just switched sides of the table, and all those people that you were doing business with, they gave you the money.
They gave us the money, and then a lot of the deals that we did were people that I knew, that I had relationships with.
And you knew the deals.
Knew the deals. I mean,
it's like cheating. Not really. That's not cheating.
There's a lot of work to get to the cheating.
Exactly. I worked really hard to cheat. No,
I worked really hard.
But so okay. So that explains it. So you're in the same room.
Same room.
You just moved positions.
That's right.
Did you move positions because you knew that owning a hedge fund and running a hedge fund was more lucrative?
100%. And more fun. Practicing law and managing lawyers is really, really hard. And I had a couple of partners, Tom Gervais and Steve Kamak, great people and great friends of mine. And they brought their own expertise. And, it was much more lucrative.
Did you have to work hard at raising money, or did it? No.
And then part of it was because it was a timing thing. In 2005, 6, 7, it was just easy to raise money.
It was so cheap.
Like, honestly, it seems crazy to even say this. There would be mornings where I would come into the office and my CFO would tell me, Scott, we got $20 million last night in the account, and we don't even know who sent it. We'd have to track it down and figure out who sent it to us, and whoever sent it to us would send it to us on the hopes we wouldn't send it back. They wanted to get it invested so bad. It was that crazy.
Oh, my gosh.
It was just easy to raise money.
So you started this in 2006. You sold it in 2000, I guess, 10, 11. Mm-hmm. So you went through the financial crisis.
Oh, yeah, we did.
So, okay, here's the thing. During these crises, like, for example, COVID, there was a huge financial dip. A lot of people lost a lot of money, but a lot of people made a lot of money.
Yeah.
So during that 2007, 8, 9, did you guys thrive or did you guys, shrink?
We shrank. We were invested in high quality assets, which was not the right place to be when they did TARP and some of those programs that gave the banks the ability to kind of turn loans into money at the Fed window. I mean, you got banks going out of business, right?
Sure.
It was a crazy time. GE Capital should have went out of business, but they got bailed out by the federal government. Mm-hmm. So these are all people that we competed against, honestly. So it was a hard time. I mean, honestly, if it wouldn't have been for 08 and 09, and again, I think differently now. I'm a believer. So if I'm taking myself back to those days, I thought I was going to be a billionaire. Like, there's no question in my mind. I was set up. We were on our way. 07 and 08 really prevented that from happening. At the end of 07, 08, and 09, we basically sold just to get the value out of what we had, and because we just didn't think we could build it after the beat down that we took during that time.
During 06, 07, when things were rolling and y'all were making money.
Making a lot of money.
So let's talk through this personally.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge proponent of I'm conservative by nature. I'm probably not a lot less conservative than some people are, but I'm conservative by nature. When you are making your income, whether it be $1 million or 20 million or whatever the number is, when you're making that income, what are you then doing with your income from an investment strategy standpoint?
Investing a lot of it back into the fund.
Back into the fund.
Yeah. A lot of it back into the fund.
Anything outside of that?
Yeah, like everybody else, I had, their normal Schwab accounts, and, I've never been much on that though. Like I've always had money in that, in, the Publix world, but I've never cared much about it. So most of the money that I've always invested has been in private businesses. So even back then, I was starting private businesses on the side. I had other companies.
What did you start during this time?
I had a company called RPS Environmental Solutions that I started during this time.
What is that?
It was oil and gas cleanup company that they did for oil spills and things like that.
Did you buy that or start that?
I bought it.
You bought it. Mm-hmm. So of the businesses and things that you've bought, even up to this day, are you more buying businesses or starting businesses?
That's a good question. I would say that I'm more investing in businesses. Occasionally I'll buy a business. I would say most of it's investing in a current business. It's just an ongoing concern that I'm trying to help grow. I've got a bunch of those kind of companies that I've invested in, that I feel like I can give you capital and some expertise and help you grow and become a better and bigger company. I've had a few like RPS that I've bought and inserted people to run it. I've had very few, honestly, that I've started from scratch.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Dude, I told somebody the other day, somebody was looking at me the other day, I said, would you ever start this business? I don't even know what they were saying. I looked at them, I said, no.
It's hard.
I said, I got a 15-year-old, 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't have the capacity to start something. Now, would I buy something that's existing and, like you said, inject money, inject any expertise, whether it be mine or someone else's, into it? Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
But like starting a business, Scott.
Hard. I don't even know that I'm that good at it.
And time consuming. And time consuming.
And it's a 12-year process, not a 5.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've always been on the investing side, so I think of things in terms of 5 and 7 years. Starting a business from scratch takes you 5 years just to even figure out.
Just to even figure out. I mean, the number of times, just in our food businesses, the number of times that we've pivoted. Oh. So this business started as meal plans.
Really? Nice.
We were doing meal plans before meal plans were a thing 14 years ago, 13 years ago. And so it started out as meal plans, and now we're feeding a college and have 2 different catering companies.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so things pivot so much. Okay, so my next question is this. How important in all of these types of businesses is raising money?
Well, I think every business for the most part needs capital. So there's a fair amount of importance with whatever you're doing. But I would always say that money rarely fixes problems. It really kind of covers them up, puts a Band-Aid on, maybe prolongs it. So I see that all the time. I mean, if I give you money and there's a problem, and that problem doesn't get fixed, you're going to need more money. So I would say it can be a little bit of a Band-Aid. It can hide some problems if you're not careful. So I think it's important that a company doesn't have too much money. Don't want them to have too little, but sometimes you get too much money, and again, if you don't fix the problems, you relax. And a lot of times people will want to throw money at problems, and they're 2 separate things. You got to fix problems and you need money.
Yeah. In your listening to you and talking to you and reading about you, it says you met Bruce. Is it Prevost?
Prevost, yeah. Bruce.
He helped you raise money for your hedge fund.
Yep.
What does that look like?
So he was what they call I forget. It's kind of like a marketing kind of firm that had relationships with all these fund of funds, and he was very good at raising money for people that had funds and investment strategies, and that's kind of what he did.
How did he make money?
He got paid for, he usually got a little bit of your profits. So you give him a little bit of your profits, and then he would get a fee up front.
Just like an acquisition fee or whatever.
It could be paid by us. Sometimes it was paid by the people that were hiring him.
Through your relationship with Bruce, you were introduced to this guy named Jesus.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that came about.
Yeah, so I met Bruce, when I first started the hedge fund world, and obviously we spent a lot of time together, as we were raising capital, and got to go and travel down to his house a few times. And I remember the first time I was down there, I got up early and was in his kitchen. He lived down in Florida, and I looked outside and I saw Bruce out there by the pool, just sitting and had a book open. I don't even know if I knew it was a Bible at the time, but when he came in, I was like, "Bruce, what you doing out there?" He's like, "Well, I'm just my quiet time." I had no idea what quiet time is. Okay. He said, "So what are you doing?" He's like, "I was just reading the Bible and I was praying." And he said, "And I was praying for you, Scott." And I'm like,
easy, bro.
I'm like, dude, you don't need to pray for me. I got everything I need, bro. Just save the prayers for somebody else. And but he just never gave up. And he'd give me Bible verses. He sent me a Bible, and he was always telling me he was praying for me, and just was this kind of constant, hey man, love you. There's something bigger, something more.
Not many people in your world, other men, were telling you that they loved you.
No, very few people in that time. Would even approach me to make a suggestion. I wasn't like an approachable guy that you were going to go tell, hey, here's some self-help ideas.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't live in the church world, or have that community, as it's not a normal necessary thing, especially as a leader.
It's so hard because I'm so insulated.
Yeah. If you're in the church world, it's just normal. But if you're not, I was
so much stuff, even though so much stuff of what I do is not in the church world.
Yeah.
But also, I typically deal with people that know Jesus.
There you go.
And that's a great
100%.
thing. It's a great thing. But there's so many guys. Ryan Williams, he's one of my best friends. He's a Bible toting, just lover of Jesus. He's a state representative in Tennessee, handles the budget for the state of Tennessee.
Nice.
And I talk to him 3 times a week and just tell him I love him every time.
That's awesome.
And I think that's normal.
That never happened in my life prior to my relationship with Christ. I can tell you
Wow.
that. Bruce was the first person that ever did this ever.
But that makes sense, though.
It does. And he had a partner. His name was David Harrell. He was also a strong believer. And Bruce, his spiritual father was a guy named Albie Pearson.
Okay, who is that?
So Albie Pearson, man, what a great man. He passed away recently, but Albie was the shortest Major League Baseball player ever. He played he was an
Shorter than
all-star.
Altuve.
Shorter. He was an all-star. He was the first player that started the Angels franchise when the Angels became a franchise. This is back, when Marilyn Monroe days.
Yeah.
Albie was the last person, I think, to do a public appearance with Marilyn Monroe. He actually escorted her to the pitcher's mound in a all-star game where he was playing she was giving a donation for a charity. It's actually a really great story. Albie wrote a book about this, and he was in the dugout.
He was a little bitty man.
Right? You're looking him up, see?
5'5". Sierra, how tall are you?
Little.
3.5.
About her size.
About your size. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this guy is kind of the spiritual father to him.
His spiritual father, Bruce, and I got to meet Albie, and obviously Albie then started just pouring into my life. But let me finish the Marilyn Monroe story because it's a great story. So Albie was playing baseball. He's in the dugout with Marilyn, and he looks at her. They make eye contact, and she says, "Are you supposed to tell me something?" And he said, "Oh, no, ma'am. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." And then they went out to the pitcher's mound. They came back. She's walking away. She turns around. She looks at him, and she says, "Are you sure that there's not something you're supposed to tell me?" He said, "No, I'm sorry." Well, she died 3 weeks later. Albie left baseball soon after that and said that he would never miss an opportunity to tell somebody about Jesus.
Oh.
And after that, he spent the rest of his life with his wife, Helen, doing amazing things for Jesus. And there's so many people. In fact, I talk to people all the time that were in Southern California during the Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
And Albie was at the front of all that. He's one of the most recognizable names in that movement. And he just gave his life to Jesus. And I just happened to be somebody that came into his world through Bruce. And Albie just listen, so after my wife, Albie brought me to Christ. He also brought my wife to Christ.
How long did it take? Like the first thought of Bruce or Albie saying something, what was the process like? How long did that take?
2 years.
Wow.
2 years of them just pouring their lives into mine.
But not like beating you over the head with the Bible, just loving you.
Just loving me and just being there for me and just building a relationship. And I remember I was in Palm Springs, Albie's house.
Yeah.
And we were in the living room, me and Bruce and Albie, and Helen's over there at the table, his wife. And we're just talking about things we normally are. We're talking about Jesus. I'm asking questions. And I remember somehow we got on the topic of just pressure of life and my job and my career, and I opened up and became transparent, and I said, well, as much success as I've had in my life, I always feel like I'm holding up this big boulder. And it's taken all of my power to hold up this boulder. But if I let that boulder go, it's going to kill everybody. It's going to kill my wife, my family, all my business partners. Everybody's going to die if I don't hold it up. And I just remember Albie just looking at me and like, man, you don't have to hold that boulder up. Wow. You can give that to Jesus. And for some reason, I'm at the top of my game.
Yeah.
But boy, the idea of like there is somebody, a Savior, that will take that boulder so that I could live with freedom, that I don't have to carry that weight.
Wow.
It was just so impactful for me. So right there in that living room, I got on my knees and gave my life to Christ. And
what year was that?
2008.
2008. So right in the middle of all the craziness and the hedge funds.
Okay, so here's the crazy thing. It was February of 2008. Mm-hmm. I came back to Dallas. I'm there walking with Erin. Every day we were walking during those days. And I remember Erin, my wife, she was like, okay, are you going to become one of those holy rollers now? And are you going to start talking about Jesus? And I'm like, nah, I don't know. I just did this like
been a Christian a week. I don't know.
I have no idea what's going to happen here. So, but then fast forward to August, and we flew to Florida to Bruce's house. Albie and his wife Helen met us there, and we're having dinner one night, and Albie walks over to Erin, and he says, tell me about what happened when you were 4 years old. And there was a traumatic event in her life that nobody would have ever known in a million years. And she just...
Did you know about it?
I didn't even know about it. And she just started weeping, just weeping. And that led to her giving her life to Christ. And I remember that night laying in bed, she just had an encounter with the Holy Spirit that, I mean, almost like shaking kind of encounter with the Holy Spirit. And honestly, she's a rock star ever since that moment. So, but here's the crazy thing about, I could listen.
That was pretty crazy.
That was crazy, but it gets even crazier. She's so Albie was responsible for it in a couple of things. One, Albie became her spiritual father, and he died about a year ago.
Yeah.
Since 2008, every week since 2008, she spent at least an hour, probably multiple hours, on the phone with Albie and Helen, with Albie praying for Erin and my family. Every week for all these years. She'd go into her office and not come out for 3 hours. And that whole 3 hours was Albie and Helen praying over her.
Oh, my God.
During all this time. So just a massive influence on our life. But right after that, now we're going to get deep here, Thomas. But right after that, so this was August 8th, my daughter's birthday, when all that happened. Fast forward a few weeks later, I get a phone call, and this is really why we didn't continue the hedge fund, why we eventually sold it. I get a call from a guy that says, Scott, I got to tell you something. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, well, Bruce and David have just been implicated in a very massive fraud. And there's a guy in Minneapolis called Tom Petters who has just been raided by the FBI and the SEC, and Bruce and David are going to get implicated in it. Well, come to find out, Petters, and if you did a Google search, he's still in prison. Petters was running a massive Ponzi scheme. Bruce and David were raising capital for him.
Did they know?
Should have known, probably, is the thing. In fact, there's a whole backstory to this where they had actually asked me to help them do some due diligence on a matter, and I did. So I had a bunch of information that I had to hand over to authorities, and actually the information I gave to the authorities put them in prison. So
Put who?
Bruce and David. So they both went to prison for 9 years. And
was Bruce pissed at you?
So,
because that guy helped lead you to Jesus.
Helped lead me to Jesus. And then my attorneys wouldn't let me talk to him. So all this goes down. He files bankruptcy. He loses everything. David loses everything. They get sentenced to 8 years in prison. They eventually start serving their time. And I never talked to Bruce again. I still haven't spoken to him since that day. I saw him and I couldn't bring myself. I feel bad about this. This is probably not great.
Confession, that's fine.
Confession.
It's
I
just
saw
me and you.
him at Albie's funeral a year ago, but I couldn't bring myself to go talk to him. Now, I did leave him a voicemail when he got out of prison to tell him that, Bruce, here's what's happened in my life, and it would have never happened but for you, so thank you for what you did. But, he started a prison ministry and led people to Jesus and got out and started another ministry. And another cool story, David Harrell So David, who went to prison also, maybe 5 years ago, when in the middle of his prison, I got a phone call from his son, who I'd not seen since he was a young child. And he was in school at Florida State. And
His son?
His son. And he called me, and I called him back, and I said, yeah, what can I do to help you, basically? And he said, well, I need some help getting a job. And I'm like, okay, well, why'd you call me? He said, well, I called my dad, who's in prison. I called my dad, and I said, Dad, who can I call that would help me? And he said, call Scott Olson. He's the only guy I think you could trust in this whole world. And this is from a guy that I put in prison. So I almost lost it when he said that. I just almost broke down. But obviously, I did everything I could to help that young man.
Yeah.
And but it just it just shows you that a lot of that was Jesus, though. I mean, it really wasn't me. Like, my life turned around there at the end, and I tried to do the right thing and try to help people. But yeah, that was a whole crazy world. They went to prison. Poor Albie, he had to testify at the prison at the sentencing, trying to save Bruce, and it just and then after that we gave up. The hedge fund was just too hard after that. I hadn't had, my heart wasn't in it, so we sold it, got rid of it, and then I was trying to pick myself off the ground for the guy that actually helped lead me to Christ is now in jail. So
Unbelievable.
It was a tough time.
Okay, we're going to end episode 1 right there because there's so much more to talk about. This was the stories here. I mean, we went from Marilyn Monroe to a guy that was a great friend of yours going to prison to the emotional roller coaster we've had in the last 50 minutes has been amazing. Part 2 is going to be just as good, if not better. So thank you for joining us today.